everybody has a sense that any type of organization needs to be more conscious and intentional around the positive and or negative impacts that they are having. That might be social, environmental, and how they need to shift those towards the positive.
Hello and welcome to the Impact Insiders podcast, the podcast that explores real-life examples of people and organizations that are making an impact. My name is Kirsten, and I'm the operations manager at Relativ. Today we are talking to Gabrielle Habberton to talk about Relativ's journey, where it started, where it is today, and what the goals are for the future. Relativ was started by Colin and Gabrielle Habberton, partners in life and business, a few years ago in 2008. It has grown to now having affiliates in New Zealand and Canada, as well as a foundation through which certain social impact initiatives are supported. Relativ serves a variety of different clients in three key areas: impact management and measurement, resource mobilization, and strategic communications. With us today is Gabrielle Habberton, co-founder and director of Relativ. Gabrielle and I have been working together for more than 2 years now, and I'm excited to hear about Relativ's journey from the person with the heart and the brain behind it all. Welcome, Gabrielle.
Thanks, Marcel.
As I mentioned, Relativ was started by Gabrielle and her husband, Colin. So, Gabrielle, firstly, I just want to find out, before we start talking about Relativ, what is it like starting a business with your husband?
I think that's a very good question, because I think that certainly has shaped a lot of how we've worked over the years. I think I'm probably giving my age away now, but something that comes to mind is growing up in the era of Dirty Dancing, the movie.
Yeah.
Is that we had to figure out quite quickly and early, whose dance space. This is my dance space, and this is your dance space, and what's the structure that holds it and holds us, and so the frame and everything. And I think especially with avoiding things spilling over into personal life, and how to have some boundaries and where those parameters begin and end, and our different strengths, and how to really play to them and enable each other to kind of operate to our fullest potential, has been a learning journey that we are still on, and still learning more things about how we can work better together and better support each other. So I would say it's been interesting.
Yeah, I can imagine at the beginning, especially, trying to figure out who does what, and not talking about work 24/7 could be difficult.
Absolutely.
But here you are today, few years along the line. So, Gabrielle, now more about Relativ. I want to know, back in 2008, where did this idea come from to start Relativ?
Going back into my memory box, in 2008, so Colin and I were both obviously working at that time. So I was working very much in the development space, kind of very much in the impact management space already, effectively working specifically around due diligence and how to allocate social investments effectively, and a lot of kind of programs and work around that with some very pioneering leaders at the time. At the same time, Colin was working in the corporate environment, and he was really coming from years of experience in the corporate world. He sat on some boards in terms of that were really focused at social investment at the time, and he was really working in the space around incentives and loyalty programs, and so really kind of that relational economic side of things. And so we were working in quite different spaces. We had known each other personally many years before through my sister, actually. And we had met up again then in 2008 and started speaking about, where we were and what we were passionate about and what really interested us. And basically that first conversation set us on a track both for our personal relationship development, but also very much around the idea for Relativ. And we really just saw the kind of passion that we both had around how we can really use the skills and the experience that we had in our respective fields to really make a difference for kind of end beneficiaries and really organizations of various shapes, sizes, etc., in terms of how we can just help kind of things progress. And we saw a real opportunity to combine our skill sets, to leverage those things and really try some different things and take a different approach in terms of really focusing on how we can look at organizations in terms of the relationships that they have and how those relationships can be leveraged, and really looking at almost like a relational economics approach, a model actually that Colin had developed. And so we started exploring some of those things.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that the two of you came from sort of different backgrounds. The type of work that you were doing were very similar, but he was in a corporate, you were more in the development space. So it's very interesting that those two came together. Yeah, and I think that's also, what Relativ focuses on, diversity in terms of clients. So that's, it's very interesting for me. And Gabrielle, then I want to know, in your experience, what have you found organizations struggle with most? And then if you can also elaborate, is that, specific to types of organizations or just in general?
I think, it's a great question. Especially now, I think they just, 2022, we've come through a pandemic, there's lots been going on. I think organizations are struggling with a lot and different types of organizations as well. So there is a lot. I think what's interesting in terms of, to your question around different types of organizations, I think what we see consistently is that there's often more similarity than people think there is between different types of organizations, different industries. And I mean, I'm talking about, from investors to implementers, and from non-profit to non-profit, shall I say, to for-profit types of organizations. There's actually a lot of similarities in terms of the kinds of things that we see can be leveraged to really make a change within organizations and help them to, have greater social environmental impact. And so that's something that we see, is that, so often there's this idea that they're completely different, these types of organizations, and they have so little in common, and you have to, it's very kind of siloed approaches to working with and within those types of industries. And I think that we certainly are seeing that there's often more similarities than one would think, which has been interesting to us. In terms of where we are now, if I think back to when we started, I think everybody has a sense that any type of organization needs to be more conscious and intentional around the positive and or negative impacts that they are having. That might be social, environmental, and how they need to shift those towards the positive.
Just to add to that, I think it's interesting that you say that, because I think, in the past, it wasn't really a focus point, and a lot of organizations only focus on being profitable, but now these days, it's very interesting to see that all of that shifts, the kind of goals that people have shift, and it's now more about impact. That's very interesting.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot more convergence in terms of those sort of strict boundaries in terms of thinking about only profit or only impact, and that really there is a lot more crossing over. We're seeing that is not something that we're having to convince people of, whereas 10 years ago that was often part of the starting point, was almost, particularly for organizations who might be operating more in a for-profit kind of mindset, there was a sense that, one needed to convince around certain elements and why they were important. Whereas I think now the starting point is everyone agrees it's important. I think now the question is, in terms of what a lot of people are struggling with is, so now we want to take action, we want to change, we want to be more impactful. We don't necessarily have the tools, the capabilities, sometimes it's mindset. I think the nuances of what kind of entry point or what type of support people need might vary, but often it's just the assistance that they need to really start them on that journey and really embed things within the organization so that they can really run with it on an ongoing basis. And so that's been really interesting to see that shift happening over time. I think now, and it gets more and more into the levels of detail. So it's almost like one of those things is once people start on the journey, then they almost actually realize additional things that they need. You don't know what you don't know. So often once people start on the journey and then they see how beneficial, for example, having a theory of change, I know not everybody uses that term, a theory of change, theory of transformation, the point being some kind of strategy around what is the impact that you're trying to achieve and what are your milestones towards achieving that. Once you've got that in place, then you see how beneficial that can be for kind of shaping how you achieve and how you implement your work. Once people start on that, then you see how valuable the kind of robust measurement can be to support that. And once people get different pieces of the puzzle, we see that they often get more inspired around kind of the value of evidence to support decision making, and really being confident about knowing what works and how and where they can change things.
Yeah, no, I think that's amazing. And what do you think is the reason for this change in focus of organizations being more impactful?
I think there's a range of things. I think, and again, I think it does, it's not necessarily the same everywhere. So I think there's some interesting things that we see, obviously in different context. So it might be in different countries, there'll be slightly different focus areas. So for example, what we see in South Africa is we live in a context where there just are such blatant struggles with inequality, poverty to just really unacceptable levels because of the past, and there's so much to be done that it's almost impossible for even a business, even if you consider yourself to be a traditional business, people almost can't get away from the fact that their potential client base is so disadvantaged that actually they don't have a sustainable client base potentially into the future unless they start to be part of some of those solutions. So I think certainly in a South African context, there's really some very obvious things where change is just so needed and so obvious that kind of thing has really helped shift thinking. I think there's some there's always the carrot and the stick. So there's the sometimes we see that really kind of policy incentives and or imperatives can really help shift in behavior, and certainly the way people think about things. So for example, if there are specific requirements around supply chains and how you need to diversify supply chains, that starts to shift thinking as well. So those kinds of things are becoming more common as well. Certainly we're seeing shifts. The evidence is also all around us from a climate change perspective. I think, again, it's just so obvious in terms of what is happening and the challenges that we are facing, the sense of urgency around that. That's also been a big contributor. And with that, I think, there's a lot of changes happening around requirements on sustainability and climate change reporting. So all of those things are kind of working together, I think, to really change how people view the work that they do and their role in the kind of environments in which they are operating, and what they need to do in order to either be, really significant agents of change, or even just to operate to achieve their own objectives, even if they're thinking kind of from from a not selfish, but kind of a, just in terms of their own business, they're just these really obvious things that the fact that we operate within an ecosystem, and are dependent on the environment in which we operate. So tangible.
I think it's amazing that there has been this change. And now that we've looked at how it has changed, now I want to know what excites you about where the sector is going, so going forward.
I think, certainly this kind of shift, the fact that it's top of mind for people, that it's topical, I think it's always great. It means that there are more people coming into the sector who are also looking to solve problems, which I think is great. And there's a lot of cross-pollination happening as well. We mentioned at the beginning, Colin and I are coming from different backgrounds. I think that's a hallmark of how we think about things at Relativ, is that we like to see what's happening in other kinds of sectors, other industries that we can leverage and draw on. We love sort of multi-skilled teams and people. So we see a lot of opportunity in terms of different people looking at these problems. I think when people are coming from different perspectives, we have new and exciting solutions. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a huge part. I think also it's really exciting. It goes with that is just kind of the consensus that's happening. So around things like impact management, and really a lot of effort being put around common language, common frameworks, people working together. There really are a lot of sort of networking and consensus building efforts that are happening, which is really helpful. It makes things very accessible to people as well. It helps to really expand.
So sort of standardizing all of these things that you mentioned people used to struggle with, but now sort of still new, and so sort of standardizing that and making it accessible.
And the other thing that I think is just really excites me almost personally about some of the work that we get to do is I think we're just really seeing the opportunity to get sort of very involved as well in organizations, and thinking right from where we start with, from the strategy and objectives that you're trying to achieve, to really building capacity within teams and making sure that their capabilities and kind of resources match and enable them to achieve those objectives. And I think that's also a result of the kind of commitment that we're seeing to people really wanting to structure themselves and make sure that they have everything in place in order to achieve the social and environmental objectives. And that commitment we're seeing is really opening things up for us to really, really get involved in a very meaningful way, which is just great for us.
I think it's so exciting that is where everything is heading, and that's great. So Gabs, in wrap up, I just want to know what is the most significant lesson that you've learned through this whole journey?
Interesting to reflect over such a long period of time.
I
would have to say I think it is actually something that was really one of our early hypotheses that we have become more and more convinced about, which is great, and that is the relationship side of things. I think that I mentioned right at the beginning, Colin was really working on and thinking a lot about relational economics, which is what we sort of spoke about in those early days. And in real terms, what that meant was we were really interested in relationships, and we counted such a privilege to be involved with our clients, and we end up building such great relationships with our clients. We feel very fortunate with that. And our partners and, everyone that we're working with, our team, a wonderful team. And, just from top to bottom and inside and out, we just see more and more the value of relationships and how important that is, and really building those relationships. And for us, coming from a perspective of really being passionate about understanding our clients and what they need, has been so valuable. And we hear it time and again as feedback from our clients, is that they seem to feel that that kind of interest from our side in terms of really understanding who they are, what they need, and how we can help them. And that seems to be something that stands out to them and their experience, and that they, often we hear mention of the experience of us being involved with in our approach to capacitating teams and really working with and focusing on how we can enable them and really create sort of a sense of independence and capacity rather than dependence. And so that kind of importance of relationships has been something, as I said, that we started off with, and has just been something that we've been more and more convinced about the importance of, and that's just such a valuable thing to us, and that it seems to be really a valuable thing to others as well. I think that's one of the biggest lessons for me.
And I think it's so valuable that it's about the relationship and not just getting the job done. So it's a great lesson to learn and a great hypothesis to actually follow through. Thank you very much to Gabrielle Habberton for taking us through Relativ's journey. This has been an Impact Insiders podcast powered by Relativ Impact. Subscribe to the podcast and make sure you don't miss any of our future episodes. For more information about Relativ Impact and the work that we're doing, check out our website and sign up to our newsletter to get updates directly to your inbox.